Hi all, Brad Wright from the Single Malt Whisky Club here, and this month, just for something a little different, we're not featuring a single malt whisky as our malt of the month. But don't panic, it's pretty bloody close. For July, we're proud to offer the Loch Lomond Single Grain Whisky. So what is single grain Scotch whisky? Well, the single refers to being produced at a single distillery, just like single malt whisky. But single grain whisky, unlike single malt, is not limited to being made from malted barley. In fact, any grain or mix of grains can be used. Unlike single malt whisky, the type of still is not defined in single grain whisky. A Scottish single malt whisky must, by definition, be distilled in a copper pot still. The still type is not regulated when it comes to single grain whisky. And so we come to a brand we featured before, Loch Lomond. Now, when we ran the Loch Lomond single malt whisky in the past, we compared their 18 and their 12-year-old single malts back in 2019. Now, Loch Lomond is a distillery that produces a wide range of whisky styles, from non-peated single malt all the way through to heavily peated single malt whiskies and blended Scotch. The Loch Lomond distillery has 3 different types of stills: pot stills, column stills, and coffee stills, which allow them to produce nearly any style of alcohol they like. So the Loch Lomond single grain whisky we're featuring this month is made from 100% malted barley. It's distilled in one distillery and it's aged in oak casks, just like single malt whisky. But in this case, there's one difference that prevents this whisky being called a single malt, and that is the style of the still used to create it. This whisky is not made in a copper pot still and therefore cannot be called single malt whisky. It was distilled in a coffee still, named after the inventor, not the beverage, instead of a copper pot still, and so can never be awarded the title of single malt whisky. It's a single grain whisky. So once again, the only difference between this whisky and a single malt whisky from Loch Lomond is the type of still it's made in. It's made from exactly the same ingredients as single malt whisky, fermented exactly the same way as single malt whisky, and aged in the same type casks. Its single difference in this case is the use of a coffee or continuous still to distill the spirit. So let's have a look at this little ripper. Here it is. No age statement, matured in ex-bourbon casks. And as we can see, the colour is a rather pale straw colour, as you can see just there. The nose, oh wow, sweet pineapple juice, the citrus zest, and a real biscuity, malty sort of flavour in there as well. The palate, oh yum, it's warm spice, and then lots more of those pineapple-y notes, some ginger, malt biscuits, and vanilla, yum. And the finish, it's sweet, it's light, and it's fruity. And there's a bit of spice there just to keep the palate warm. It's a delicious whiskey. It's very easy to drink. It's very light, very fruity, just a little bit of spice there. So now, on to our optional extra. And we are proud to offer the first Australian independent bottling we've ever featured. This is the Spirit Thief Belgrove Distillery French Oak Mataro Cask Matured Single Malt Whisky. Now, the boys at Spirit Thief do things a little differently than most. They describe themselves as gypsy distillers. In short, what this means is that they don't just purchase spirit from donor distilleries to age themselves. They actually work with the distiller, helping with all aspects of the production up to and including the actual distillation. In short, it's much more of a co-production with the donor distillery than a simple purchase of some new make spirit thrown into barrels to mature. And so, on to this month's optional extra. The Spirit Thief Belgrove Distillery. Brewed at Last Rites Brewing, then distilled at Peter Bignell's Belgrove Distillery before being aged for 2.5 years in Mataro casks. Now, Mataro is an older breed of grape that was very popular in sherry production for one of its uses. It also featured a lot of wine blends up until the discovery, I guess, and widespread adoption of the Cab Sav Shiraz blend we all know and drink a lot of today in Australia. And so here it is. Yeah, excuse me. It's in a rather dehydrated state, as you can see. Suffice to say, I've taken a bit of a liking to this one over the last week or so. The colour there, as you can see, it's a very satisfying coppery brown. Ka-ching. Here it is. So the colour, yeah, very satisfying coppery brown. The nose, there's sweet espresso, it's hazelnut syrup, but there's also a pleasant whiff of sort of leather in the background. And on the palate, wow. It's a really brief burst of sort of charcoal-like notes. Definitely not peat though. This is a much crunchier sort of flavour. And then a mild spice precedes a delicious, and I mean delicious, roasted peanut brittle with toffee, scorched almonds, and delightful overall toasted nuttiness here. The finish, yum. It's long, the finish is luscious. Yeah, it's chewy. It's got spice, nuts, and chocolate, all taking a bit of a turn at the wheel. This is possibly one of the least fruity, most nutty whiskies I've ever tried. And it's an absolute knockout. Like I said, it's like a big peanut brittle in a glass. It's absolutely beautiful. Well, that's it from me for another month. Our malt of the month this month, the Loch Lomond single grain, not single malt, single grain, differing only in the type of still that it's distilled in. And our optional extra, the Spirit Thief Belgrove Distillery Mataro cask matured. Well, that's it from me once again. Our malt of the month, the Loch Lomond single grain whiskey, something a little different. In this case, it's identical to a single malt in all but the still it was created in. And our optional extra from Spirit Thief, only 250 bottles of this one, this Belgrove Distillery independent bottling. It's indeed a limited edition and it will not last long. 2 fantastic whiskies to choose from this month. I'm Brad Wright, Single Malt Whisky Club. Till next month, Slàinte mhath.